Holy Gospel according to Luke. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words to them seemed an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up, ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home amazed at what had happened. This is the good news. Praise to you. You may be seated. My spouse and I have a 17-month-old daughter, and shortly after she was born, I felt this deep need to apologize to my own parents. In those first few hours after holding Romney Ann, time filled with nursing her and just watching her, I was totally overwhelmed by how much I loved her. It was like my heart had been set outside of my body and was lying in a hospital bassinet, in so many ways completely vulnerable to harm. After this wave of love and protection started to sink in, I was having this enhanced realization of how much my own parents must love me, and then how much some of my words and actions growing up maybe hurt them. I remember sitting in the hospital room with my mom, holding only hours-old Romney Ann, sharing this unexplainable feeling and telling my mom I was sorry for all the things I had done that may have hurt her or my father. She smiled and said, "It's okay. One day Romney Ann will say something mean and hurtful, and she will tell you no, but it won't change how much you love her at all." "Mom," I sarcastically began, "I'm sorry, but I'm certain she will never tell me no." "Can you not see how perfect she is?" My mom's response, "You keep living in that fantasy world." I was kidding, but the joke has continued. Whenever Romney Ann doesn't do what we ask, when she touches something with that dimpled smile after we've told her not to, my parents or my siblings will say, "Oh, Sarah, is that her telling you no?" Now, at 17 months, Romney Ann maybe has been a little delayed in her speech and really hasn't said much clearly other than "Dada, of course." So truly, she has not told us no. I know one day she will. She will learn that 2-letter word, and I'm sure she will say it clearly and use it often. It just hasn't happened yet. As I was preparing for today, the story and idea of Romney Ann saying no kept coming to my mind. Although there are times when Romney Ann saying no will most certainly get on my nerves, I actually hope she learns to say it, and I hope she's surrounded by people saying no. No when it comes to comments and actions and systems that hurt her neighbor and are causing death. Because we know that's not the way of the empty tomb. That's not the life of the resurrection. From our gospel reading today, these women at the tomb say no to death. They're first saying no by simply going. It would have been dangerous for them to travel to the tomb. It appears as if the empire has won and all who followed Jesus were in danger. But there's work to be done, and they go. And these women, who are not merely errand runners for the disciples, but are themselves disciples, in their pain and their grief, they may have forgotten Christ's promise of the resurrection. All of the disciples have, but they go. And while at the tomb, these men in dazzling clothes appear and say to them, "Remember how we told you, the Son of Man must be handed over to the sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." They remember. They remember that death has been defeated. These incredibly strong and brave women then go and remind the rest of the disciples of what Jesus had told them all. Death is not the end. The story is not over. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women are the first to begin this call to say no to death, to share that there is promise in the empty tomb, and it is life for all. And this is a call that we get to be a part of even today. We are called to share the glory of the resurrection in a world filled with death. One of our baptismal promises is a call to strive for justice and peace in all the earth. Wherever this is lacking, wherever we see a break in community, this is where we find death. It's all around us. When we see our neighbor hurting and do not reach out, when we see injustice and do not stand up, when we hear of another senseless shooting and are led to believe that this is just life as we know it, this is death. Death is caused by the sins of patriarchy, racism, sexism, homophobia, entitlement, greed, privilege. And this death, brothers and sisters, is a lie. We know this because we know the tomb was empty, and we know the promise that this brings. Our call is to walk a life that is different, that instead brings life to our neighbor. Our call is to live into the example of these women at the tomb and to remind those around us that death does not get the final word. The tomb is empty. There's resurrection. Whoa, I don't know about you, but when I think about the hurt in this world, it is super overwhelming to me. Where do I start? Where do we start? What does it look like to say no to death? No single one of us can take it on ourselves, of course, but we are church. We are a gathered body of called people of faith. And I believe that in our own little corners of the world, in our own little corners of the church, in small and in big ways, we can say no and make a difference. Maybe it looks like speaking up. My spouse previously worked as a project manager of a construction company. Like many work environments, there's always a bit of politics, and you want to keep your clients happy. Well, in the beginning stages of one of their projects, the leadership of his construction company was sitting down with their client and meeting about the building that was in process. Although it is not a part of code in South Carolina, it's becoming general good practice for new constructions to have a room for nursing mothers. One of the project managers mentioned this to the owners with thoughts about places in the plans it could be added without disrupting much. The thought was to add the room next to the break room, and the question was asked, does the nursing room also need a sink and a refrigerator, or is the break room close enough? In that room, around that table, sat all men. Ooh. One man seemed disgusted with the thought of the room. Another shared that the room definitely needed its own fridge because breast milk was not going to sit next to his lunch. And yet another man joked and asked, why would we be hiring any women who would be nursing and need such a room? While these men may argue they were just joking, it's this type of locker room talk that is death. It's a break in community when women are not seen as equals, as ones who can both be a mom and provide for their families. This type of speak is happening in workplaces all over the country, and maybe, dare I say it, in some of our churches. Brandon, sitting around this table with his bosses and their clients, finds the courage to share, my wife is actually a nursing and working mom, and I think having a sink and a refrigerator would be really nice. It's not easy to speak up when you may have a different perspective. These could easily have been comments about immigrants, persons of color, people with disabilities, those identifying as LGBTQIA+, any number of groups in which many in society have built walls and said, you are less than, you are not welcome. It may seem small, but we have no idea how far the ripples will go when one speaks up with love and acceptance and speaks down these ideas that divide. When we say no to a death that creates a break in our community and instead share the good news of the empty tomb, that all God's children have value and are loved. Maybe sometimes it looks like reaching out to love those others have given up on. As a called minister of word and service in the ELCA, I have the absolute joy and honor to serve as the volunteer coordinator for Thornwell, a ministry that serves children and families. There are many different aspects of Thornwell's ministry that all fit together to create a continuum of care. And at the center of it all is this core goal to serve and strengthen families. The oldest part of the ministry, nearly 150 years old, is a residential program which began as a traditional orphanage before the foster care system was ever in existence. Now, most of the teenagers who are placed with us are placed through us through the South Carolina Department of Social Services and have likely been removed from their homes for reasons of abuse or neglect. Recently, due to some changes in the South Carolina laws, only children from the ages of 12 to 18 can be placed in what is considered congregate care, a residential program like Thornwell's. There are a lot of misconceptions about the foster care system, and especially the children who have been placed within it. Many say 12 is too late. At 12, the circumstances, which are all out of this child's hands, have set the course for their future. Many wonder how a ministry like Thornwell could really help a teenager. It's just too late. This hopelessness, even worse, this indifference, is a death. Those individuals who have been called to serve and to live in relationship with these teenagers day in and day out know that this death is a lie. There is resurrection. As a dear friend of mine reflected, quote, maybe we think it's too late to care for teenagers because we think our love will somehow be wasted. A 5-year-old will love us back in a way that a 17-year-old might not. A younger kid will still want to be tucked in, still want to crawl into your lap to hear a story, still want to draw pictures for your refrigerator door. Maybe a teenager doesn't want that. That doesn't make it too late. People aren't worth loving because of what we get out of it. Reciprocity in love is an amazing thing, but making it a requirement distorts what it means for love to be unconditional, end quote. The work being done at Thornwell and in ministries across this country to serve children and teens living in a vulnerable state is worth it. These teenagers are worth loving and worth loving well, simply because of whose they are. There are so many other communities among us that many say it's too late to help. The problem is just too big. Those who are suffering from homelessness, addiction, or mental illness, those who have been incarcerated, People say it's too late, but we know better. We say no to this lie. We know that the work of the empty tomb is powerful. There is life for all who are created in God's image, that all are worth loving and worth loving well. Our passage from Romans tells us we are no longer enslaved to sin. Instead, we walk in newness of life. Believing in resurrection life takes faith and courage. It is more than merely saying yes, but also saying no to these powers of death with our voices and our actions. Sometimes it may look like not laughing at an offensive joke. Sometimes it may look like finding the courage to gently share a different opinion at a meeting. Sometimes it may look like loving those whom others say it's too late. And maybe sometimes it looks like holding a sign, marching, and raising your voice loud for all to hear. This walk in a newness of life, to say no to death and yes to a life of love in Christ, is for all of us. Those who are sitting around a table at a construction site, those sitting in a cubicle crunching numbers, those preaching from a pulpit, those serving in a nonprofit, those working on Capitol Hill, and those sweating out in a pasture. In our own respective vocations, we are called in small and in big ways to say no. Despite me not wanting Romney Ann to tell me no when I ask her to clean her room or help with the dishes, I hope and pray she learns to say no. I hope she sees me saying no. I hope she continues to see her church saying no. We are church. Let us live a life like the women at the tomb. Let us boldly go and say no to death, to share the good news of the empty tomb, that all are loved and equal in God's eyes, and all are worthy to be loved and be loved well. Everybody, always. Amen.